remember a story that is connected with that middle song that we finished singing, Majesty. The author, Jack Hayford, pastored a church in California, but I think it was the 25th anniversary of Queen Elizabeth. The Hayfords were over in England and just visiting the country. And he said everywhere we went, it was Her Majesty this, Her Majesty that, and they sold things. It was almost like she was a Detroit Lion, you know. We went over that way yesterday, and when we stopped for lunch, everybody that came in wearing lion garb. Well, I don't know that they'll be wearing it today. But the Hayfords were there, and they said the whole time we were in England, it was all about Her Majesty. And he was kind of complaining about it. And his wife said, well, I know that you and I believe in the true majesty. Maybe what you ought to do is go home and write a song about it. Well, he didn't write a long one, but it's a good one that we just finished singing. And it talks about the true majesty of our God in heaven. And so we ought to really be able to sing that song anytime we are called on to do it, because we do have a great King of all kings and Lord of all lords. Amen. Well, I'm sorry to say that my wife is not here today. She woke up this morning and had she sounded sort of like M.R. DeHaan. I don't know if any of you ever remember that gravelly voice that he would preach with on the radio. But her throat, she said, was just raw. And I said, well, I think you probably should stay home today. I don't imagine any of the folks at Snow would like to have any of what you have right now as we go into the deep freeze this week. And so she's at home. I don't know, we have not gotten in tune with ever watching what I have to say on, I pretty much know what I should have said, and I don't know, maybe sometimes I say things that I shouldn't say, but at any rate, I'm not sure that she will. We're not Facebook people. Many years ago, we decided, well, and basically we don't know what's going on in our kids' life because they're all Facebook people. I don't know where you draw the lines on these things, but at any rate, pray for Jo that the throat will come back and she'll be able to keep me in line. I think she can probably do that whether she has a voice or not. But it's not because, and she knew what my subject would be this morning. We've spent 2 weeks for sure kind of beating up on the guys a little bit. And so you know where we are in Titus, and not only does God leave a message for men, he leaves a message for women. And he starts with the older women, and then he tells the older women, you also need to teach the younger women. Now, I don't know how far we'll get this morning, whether we'll throw the whole load off on you, but that's where we're at in the book of Titus, chapter 2, and verses 2 or 3 through 5. 3 through 5. And Paul begins to talk to Titus about things that he needs to pass on to the women in the church. He uses a couple of words to say it's similar to what he's been doing to the men. You see those words in verse 3, likewise. Been hammering away on you guys. Now, women, it's your turn to hear what the Lord has to say to you. And by the way, it's just as important that the women of Snow Bible Church hear what God has to say to you, as it is for the men not to forget what we have tried to let you know God has said to you. Now, Gordy, he missed all that, except he told me that he's been watching on his phone these weeks. So we're expecting great things from Gordy, aren't we? He's had it on his phone, and that's more than what I've had, Gordy. When Paul speaks to older women, and that's where he starts, he is referring to women probably in the same age range as the older men. Do you remember what an older man is? What age an older man is considered an older man?
You said grandpa age.
At what age?
You said grandpa age.
Okay, grandpa, okay.
50.
And yeah, 60 is, but did any of you become a grandpa before 60? Yeah? Yeah. In fact, I'm a great-grandpa,
Yes, you
and
are.
I'm not 80 yet. I don't know. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess.
I'm a great.
Are you just saying that?
No,
No? You really are
I'm a great. I'm too great.
2 grades. Okay. Wow. That, I'm not going to say anything, okay?
I'm only 66.
Yeah. Now, it's impossible for me to overstate the value of godly older women in the church. You are so valuable to this house of God if you are a godly older woman. Younger women are watching you, and they need to learn from you. You need to be an example to them. They need to hear how you were able to handle losses, grieving times, how you were able to carry the burdens of life. They haven't yet done all that, but you have. And you need to show them an example how it is done. Learn how you became a winsome, contagious older person. You are that, aren't you? I sure hope that you're getting that kind of example across to the younger women in the church and the younger women in your life. Let's look at the description of a godly grandmother. Or you don't even have to be a grandmother. You could be a godly, older, single lady. Maybe you've never been married. There's a lot of good people like that never had a family, don't have any of their own children. I remember a godly lady in the church in Winona Lake, Indiana. Her name was Mrs. Struther. I'm not sure I knew her first name because we weren't allowed to ever call an older person by their first name. I just know her, she was Mrs. Struther. Her original home was in Louisville, Kentucky. But Mrs. Struther had a boarding house in Winona Lake, Indiana, and every summer, when people would come into town to attend conferences, many people would stay every week of the summer in her boarding house. After the summer was over, she would go back to Louisville and straighten all of her kids out, and then she would come back and finish the winter in her boarding house in Winona Lake. Wonderful Mrs. Brother. I was talking to a preacher in the Detroit area years ago. He went to school in Winona Lake, Indiana. And I said to Ron, I said, "Did you ever meet Mrs. Struther?" "Oh, did I meet Mrs. Struther? She was a wonderful Kentucky woman." And he said, "I remember when I became engaged to the lady who was then his wife, she also was from Kentucky. And he said, I couldn't wait to tell her about my engagement. And so he said, I went by her house. By the way, in the wintertime, she would often cook meals for the seminary single guys. And in the case of Ron and his roommate, she would hand deliver them to their apartment. And when they got out of school and came home for lunch, there was a meal from Mrs. Struther. I mean, did that man know Mrs. Struther? I think he did. But he said, I had to tell her about my Kentucky bride. And so he said, I started telling her about how wonderful Irene was. She was a student in Cedarville College down in Ohio, southern Ohio. She had studied to be a nurse, and now she's going to be Ron Grafe's wife. And he said, I told everything about this wonderful lady to my friend from Kentucky. And do you know the first thing she said to me? I said, what did she ask you? He said, Ron, is she a Baptist? And he said, yes, Mrs. Struther, she's even a Baptist. And that wouldn't mean a whole lot to you, but thanks for chuckling with me anyway. I remember one night she would ride with us to church, and then we only lived a block away from Mrs. Struther's house out on the island, and Mrs. Struther, before she got out of the car this one night, she said to everybody in the car, baptism is so important. She said, do you know that Jesus walked 60 miles to be baptized by John in the Jordan? Well, I still remember, so I guess she might have taught that lesson well to me. Oh, I loved her. I'm sure she's with the Lord in heaven now, but she was a godly woman who had a word of beautiful, lovely godliness for the younger ladies. And she would get on their case too if she thought the sleeves on their dress was a little too short, or if she would tell them if anything wasn't quitely appropriate. But she did it in a winsome way. She was never a grumpy, godly grandmother. Well, what does Paul have to say to you, older ladies? You grandma-type ladies. What would make you winsome? What would make you godly? Notice the first part of verse 3. He says the older women likewise, just like the old guys, likewise, that they be, what's the first instruction? Reverent in your behavior. Now, this kind of life is simply just the life of following Christ. Have you made it your pattern to use Jesus as your example, your illustration of how you ought to live life? Paul gives some clues about what that kind of godly living looks like. And so he says in the second part of verse 3, women who are not slanderers. We don't use slander a whole lot these days, do we? I don't know that we probably are more frequently using the word gossips, slanders. This term, by the way, is used 34 times in the New Testament to describe Satan. Now, if Satan's one of his chief characteristics is slander, it shouldn't be one of ours or one of yours, ladies. Not slanders, not gossips. What is gossip? Well, simply put, it's the bearing of bad news behind somebody's back out of a bad heart. I mean, nothing good is going to come of anybody that's a slanderer or a gossip. To speak critically of another person with the intent to hurt them. And there's so much of that can happen. Even in a good church, gossip can happen. Ezekiel says in chapter 36 and verse 3 that gossip is evil. You don't want to be known as an evil grandma, do you? And by the way, guys are just as bad with gossip as women. I know we like to say, well, it's the women that do all this gossiping. But I'll tell you, you be around some guys for very long, and you'll hear the same corruption coming out of their mouth as well. It's what I'm trying to say, it's not an innocent pastime. Even if you grew up with a party line on your phone, and yet, if you wanted to know what was going on, you just get off the line, they would say. Yes, ma'am. But then you still kind of wanted to hear what they would say next. Such conversation involves, this is why it's so bad, it involves rumors and opinions that aren't always very godly. It's sharing inside information that you know they haven't heard yet, but boy, you've got to make sure that they know it. Can I just say, and this is kind of summing it up, gossip is never honoring to God. The next time before you say something to your friend on the phone, or to your friend, it probably won't be over the backyard fence this week, I don't suppose. But maybe you'll run into somebody at the grocery store, or maybe at the hairdresser, or maybe somewhere else where you just sit down over a cup of coffee, start talking to somebody else. Make sure that you've put a key and locked up any opportunity to gossip about anyone or anything. Here's the third thing. I don't know that this is a problem for any of you ladies, but it's still here in case it is. Not given too much wine. That's the third part of verse 3. Not enslaved to much wine, the NASV says. The Message is a little bit more blunt. The Message translation says, not drunks. Well, persistent drinking was a problem in the day that Titus was in Crete. And it's probably no mystery to you that over drinking is still a problem in our day. Certainly in men, but it goes beyond men, and a lot of times the women, they may do it in a more secret way, but there are some women who have given themselves to a favorite kind of alcohol, maybe a wine. There are even some who maybe don't have that particular problem, but they let particular drugs influence them. My wife has a very sensitive nose, and almost any place we drive these days, she'll all of a sudden say, "Ah!" I said, "What's wrong?" She says, "Don't you smell that?" And it's somebody with a marijuana cigarette in their mouth, and they blow it out into the air enough to where it comes through our car. Even when the windows are up, she still seems to get a whiff of it. Becoming a Christian does not always do away with every habit that you had before you began trusting Jesus Christ. Some people hang on to them, and every once in a while they will turn to them during a time of stress or a time of grief. And Paul is just saying to Titus, please let these godly women know that they need to do away with that. Not have it as a part of their living. Paul is asking Titus to assist the older men, the older women, to break sinful habits. Instead, he said, what you need to do, the fourth thing there in verse 3, you need to become a teacher of good things. A teacher of good things. Basically, he's saying, ladies, you need to let your reverent behavior be passed on to the next generation. You need to be a model of what is good by living it yourself. You get to the first part of verse 4, and he says, here's what I want you to start your teaching, what the subject that you really need to begin with. Encourage the young women to love their husbands. Love their husbands by the example of your life, because you have shown and demonstrated how true love is shown to your husband, Grandma. Then the younger, the next generation, my Grandma Swedberg would always say, the next generation. She never could get the G from her Swedish brogue. It's the younger generation. And she was always talking about, well, yeah, she did her share of talking. But she also demonstrated what it meant for a young gal just married in the last year or a few years to demonstrate love for their husbands. This is God's will. It has nothing to do with your husband's worthiness, because the Lord knows he's probably not worthy of your love, but the Lord says just love him anyway. Now, I've got to tell you what word Paul used to describe the love here. He did not use the big, wonderful agape, which we went over with the men. Remember, guys? 1 Corinthians 13. That described what love is for us. But he slips in another word that's translated love for the women. Phileo. Did you know that's where you get the word for the town out in eastern Pennsylvania, Philadelphia? It's supposed to be the city of brotherly love. Have you ever been to Philadelphia? Have you ever watched their football team or the fans in the Philadelphia stands, and how they don't seem to be filled with filial kind of love at all? Get that bomb. Remember. Well, that's not in the message, so let's leave it out. Older women are to train younger women to love their husbands. Why was that needed? Can you believe that when women got married back in that day, they did not know anything about a courtship? Now, most of you, do you remember when you got married? Do you remember, we always used to sing, the frog went a-courtin', he did right. Well, a guy would go a-courtin'. I remember courting Jolynn. You know, we went to the same school together. When I went down to Baptist College, she came down from the UP. Her place where she lived on the campus was called the Apartments. They were on the far side. They're still there today. The Apartments. Mine was just across from the dining hall. I was in Quincer Hall. So if we went to supper together or to breakfast, no, I never got up for breakfast, hardly at all. So she went by herself. But I would be at the window watching the path that came across from the Apartments. And when I saw somebody in a nice red top, see a couple of them, one on a lady and one on a man on this side. When I saw the red top, I thought, here she comes. I don't know if she wore some other, I don't remember what her coat looked like. I'm sure that she wore a coat over the red sweater or the red whatever. But I knew she was coming, and oh, was I excited. I could now eat. I could have gone through the line before, but I wanted to wait till she came. Why? Because I was courting her. Now, it was still a couple of years till we got married, but that courtship was so important to me. It was very important when I went to sell dictionaries in Miami, Florida one summer. Yeah, I sold dictionaries to pay for school. In Miami, Florida. And while I was selling dictionaries, Joe went to Six Lakes. You know where Six Lakes is, don't you? And she worked in a pickle factory. Loaded pickles in jars, you know. What? I don't remember. It wasn't Aunt Jane's, I don't think. It was some pickle brand. But But, you know, the important thing to me was not what she was doing all summer, but the important thing to me was when I would go to the mailbox every night, I wanted to find out if there was some kind of a letter from Joe. And guess what? Probably 4, 5, sometimes even 6 times a week, she would send me a letter. And when I would read her letter, I couldn't wait to sit down and try and send one back to her so that she would have something to see when she would go to the mailbox. That was just another part of our courtship. Falling in love with one another. But they didn't have courtships. You know how they got married? Dad would decide, maybe with a little advice from his wife, who should our kid marry? Who should our daughter marry? Well, this guy, he's making a good living. He'd probably work. This guy seems to be important. He'd probably make a good husband. But love had nothing to do with it. It was arranged. And I will say this, sometimes those marriages were deranged. They were not good matches. But I say all that because I want you to know, girls in that day didn't know what it was like to love their husbands. They were just stuck with him. They didn't say, oh, please get me this one. It's kind of like Isaac. Do you remember how Isaac got married? He didn't know his bride from Gazella. I mean, the servant guy went far away and picked out his bride and brought her back to Isaac. And when she saw this guy walking across the field, she said to the servant man, she said, who's that? She said, that's my master's son. And she knew right away, oh, that's my husband. That's the first time she laid eyes on the guy. And remember what we said about Isaac and Rebekah. They had a pretty rocky marriage. He liked the older guy because he could bring home a deer and fix a good venison steak. She liked the younger brother, her son, Jacob, because he kind of liked to hang around. He was a pretty good cook too, but yeah, she liked him and Dad liked him, and they didn't really see eye to eye on a lot of stuff. And what Paul is saying to grandmas here today, you need to teach your granddaughter or your daughters how to love their husbands. Older women needed to teach these younger wives how to love, and not do it as busybodies, always interfering with them. What are you doing? No, just tell them outright and show them more than tell them how they can love their husbands. Just be a humble advisor. Things as simple as, you know how you can love your husband? Cook something he really likes. You say, I don't even know what he likes. Well, go ask his mom. And not just what does he like, but you better find out how she makes it. Because there's all different kinds of ways of fixing Swiss steak. Or a soup. Or whatever. Find out. And he'll be amazed if you make something that tastes like Mom's that he really liked. Now, don't fix something that Mom fixed that he had to eat, but he didn't really like eating at any time in his life. Don't fix that for him necessarily, but Do you know what Jolynn does for me?
Yeah.
She found out things that I really liked that my mom fixed. And some things she never could quite get it the way Mom got it. But she tried, and I give her an A+ for trying. You know what I had this last week that probably a diabetic shouldn't be eating that much of? She stood by the stove and she fixed homemade French fries.
Ooh, yum.
Now, she used a potato that when it was cooked in that oil, it had a certain amount of sweetness to it even.
Sweet potato.
Does she like French fries like that? Yeah. It's not her thing. She ate maybe 3 or 4. I ate 2 big helpings of it. Why do we do that? Because she loves me. You know what? I come out to breakfast and she will say, "What would you like for breakfast today?" You know what I had this morning? I had a glass of tomato juice. You say, big deal. You can buy a jug of tomato juice at Myers. Yeah, but you know how I like my tomato juice?
Whiskey.
I like to add a dollop of sauerkraut juice. Now, how many of you put sauerkraut juice in your tomato juice? All I see out here is, you can tell how bad it would taste, right? No, it's great. But we were at the end of the last can of Frank's sauerkraut juice. It's not sauerkraut where you drain the juice off of the kraut. This is just juice. You buy it in a can and it's just juice. Sauerkraut juice. The last case of it that I bought was from a meat market over on the west side of Grand Rapids. I don't even know how you pronounce the market. Sobeys or something like that. Anybody know Sobeys? Yeah. They're great meats. Yeah. We don't buy our meat there, but I bought a case of sauerkraut, 24 cans of sauerkraut. It lasted me 2.5 years. But they didn't sell it by a can. They said, "Well, we can order a case for you." I go ahead and order it. So I was done with that. So I called the meat market up and I said, "Can I get another case?" "No, can't get that for you." How can I drink tomato juice without sauerkraut in it? Do you know what my wife did? She got on her phone and looked up Amazon, and guess what? Amazon sells sauerkraut. You'll know where to buy it now. Amazon sold, I think it was 6 14-ounce cans of Frank's sauerkraut juice. And it, $25. Now Irwin's sitting back there saying, "I think I could probably beat that deal." But you know what came Friday? That case of 6 cans of 14-ounce Frank's sauerkraut. I'm good for another year and a half now. I only put a little bit in my top of my, and I only drink tomato juice maybe twice a week. Otherwise, it's the other standard stuff. This morning, I think I brought along a bottle of apple juice, of all things, apple juice. But I've already finished that. Here we are. What I'm saying, ladies, is you've got to teach the younger women how to love their wives. But not only that, to also love their children, verse 4 says. To have a positive feeling towards their children, their offspring. There was a day when wives were home with the kids. When they took off for school, when they got home from school, they were just around. Mom, what's there to eat? And Mom would say, well, I think there's some bread. Maybe there's at our house, we always have oleo. Probably didn't eat it at your house, but that's what we had at our house, oleo. And oleo was as good as butter to me. I didn't know anything else. The other thing, Mom always had a great big jar of grape jelly. A lot of my sandwiches were just grape and oleo sandwiches that I take my lunch to school. When my brother got out of home and went to college, I don't think he's ever ate a grape jelly sandwich since. It was not his thing. But that's all there was. If you wanted to eat, you ate that. And he ate it. Jelly sandwiches. I always appreciate adding some peanut butter with it. Peanut butter and jelly. But it usually is grape jelly for me. And my wife learned that I'm not big on raspberry jelly. It's got all those seeds in it. Even strawberry jelly has some seeds in it, and I don't have that many teeth that aren't my own. So it's not because they get under my false teeth or whatever, but I eat it, but it's not my favorite. I still am a grape jelly person. You know what my wife buys? Don't say peach, because it's okay, but I eat peach, but she buys grape jelly for me. Why? Because she knows I like it. Oh, my time's gone. I'm going, anyway, just so you can chew on this, because I've given you a bunch of, it's sort of been a skyscraper sermon this morning, hasn't it? You know what a skyscraper sermon is? It's one story on top of another. And you've heard some stories this morning. Let me just tell you what I think a loving mom is all about. Here it is, real quick. A loving mom gives spiritual guidance. She wants her children to come to Christ, know them as their Savior. She also gives moral training. That is, she's full of biblical standards, not her standards, but God's standards for all of our life. And so a loving mother will teach moral standards to her kids. She will look out for their physical well-being. She has her eyes on you. If your neck's dirty, you go back and you wash it until it's clean. If your hands are dirty, you go wash them until they're clean. If you didn't brush your teeth, get out of bed and go back and brush your teeth before you go to bed. She's always looking out. And my mom looked out for my, I wore glasses since I was 4. My first optometrist was in Pasadena, California. When we moved away from California, my mom said to my eye doctor there, we're moving to Denver. Can you recommend a good eye doctor for my son Tom when we moved to Denver? And he gave her the name of, I remember his name, Swigert was his name, Dr. Swigert. And even when we moved to Kansas, my mom would drive me back to Denver, 300 miles away to go to that doctor. Why? Because she was interested in my physical well-being, my eyes. A loving mother is wise. She gains a lot of knowledge and insights that she's willing to share. A loving mother cares for her household. One of my favorite pastimes when I was in kindergarten was to crawl along the carpet when Mom was doing vacuuming, because the back of her vacuum cleaner shot out nice warm air. And I just loved to have that warm air blow in my face. And Mom never said, "Get up from there. You're ruining the carpet where I just vacuumed." No, she just cared for the household. And, you know, 3 traits, there are a whole bunch of them. But if you're going to love your kids, you've got to be kind. I think you need to also be joyful. And probably most of all, you need to be patient. Because kids demand a lot of patience. And then, finally, and we might have to say something about it next week, because there's some things we haven't even started talking about, the things that he wants to be taught to the younger women. Just getting started with it. Need to encourage laughter and fun. Oh, did we ever have wonderful times as I grew up. Fun times, filled with laughter, filled with funny stories, filled with jokes. Just had a wonderful time growing up. Where did my mom learn that? From her mom. Where did my dad learn? From his dad. Where are you going to learn it? From your mom? From your mom's mom? Yeah. Lord, help us. This church needs some godly older ladies and some godly younger ladies. May one teach the other, and may we all serve the Lord. I pray, Lord, your blessing upon us during this week to live out what you have told us in this verse from an old letter that Paul wrote to Titus. And Lord, if there's someone that has never been taught the way of salvation, may they find out this morning before they leave to head home how they can know Christ.